Welcome to Bet on the Web, an Ionic podcast. Join Matt Netko and Mike Hardington as they discuss a variety of topics through the lens of the open web. The core Ionic team you know and love, as well as industry experts, will join them in covering important industry trends, sharing thought leadership, and debating the newest technology shaping the web platform landscape.
Welcome, everyone, to another wonderful episode. Here I'm joined by my colleague, Matthew Netko.
Hello. Good to be here, Mike.
Cool. So today we're going to take a little bit of a detour. Last time we talked about, Matt, your background. Let's talk about something that we both have in common, and that is hybrid development. It's a bit of a loaded term, don't you think?
Yeah, and one that is not definitely comes with a little bit of baggage and confusion. So I'm really looking forward to kind of elaborating on it today.
Yeah, and having both of us having been in this space for quite some time, I mean, we've seen mixed of the good kind of references that come with the term and the bad and everything in between. But let's kind of just dive right into it and figure out what actually is a hybrid app. Because there are people who still don't know.
Yep, that's true. And I'd say even before we kind of explain that, let's talk about a little bit of historical background context too, and where I think it leads us to this discussion of what's involved with hybrid and compared to native development, right? So we at Ionic love to mention what we call the mobile delivery gap. And what that kind of means is whether you're a small startup to a large company, what we're kind of seeing trend-wise is demand, especially over time here, demand for mobile experiences is growing at such a fast rate. It's incredibly fast and much faster than most IT teams can deliver. Especially mobile experiences, but really across the web, desktop, and everything. And so according to Gartner, that's a 5x rate of apps internally and externally, but also internally that are needing to be developed to support your end users, your internal sales force, your marketing folks, everything, right? Software is just, I love the phrase software is eating the world, right? Because it absolutely is. And everyone across all industries is affected by that. So when we talk about, and kind of frame where the hybrid approach is coming from, I think that kind of background is useful to know about. So what is a hybrid app exactly? At the end of the day, it's still a native app. The key difference between that, though, is it's using web technologies, so HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, with one code base and packaging that into a native app format. And the secret sauce there and the ability to do that is we essentially take with tools you may or may not have heard of called PhoneGaps and Cordova, kind of interchangeable terms at this point. We take our web assets, web code, images, fonts, everything, and using what's called a web view, which is invisible to our end users. To them, the mobile app experience is still a mobile iOS, Android app, etc. And we take that and embed those into a native app shell. And at the end of the day, what a web view really acts like is an embedded browser within the native app. So it's still running on and using those same web technologies, but to the end user, it's still a native app.
See, you brought up some good points and some kind of definitions that, I mean, they're your definitions. There's some points in that I would push a little bit further even. So like the whole idea of it having to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, I would question that because we're seeing more apps like HTML is just like an afterthought. I would seriously consider that, if you're building something for iOS and Android, and even a portion of that app is not using the full native technologies, like you have a little bit of JavaScript in there, and it's just to do some communications here and there. I would consider that a hybrid app. Like I remember my I would remember my first experience in this hybrid, like in this non-traditional like hybrid space, was back using titanium. And if you've ever used titanium before, it wasn't there was no HTML. It was all JavaScript driven. Um, and you would they have this titanium runtime that would compile down to um, native UI. And I would still consider that, even to this day, that that's a hybrid app, because we're not just using the native SDKs. We're using a mix of technologies that are going in. And, while we're still shipping native code, it's not entirely based around a native view, a native SDK. There's some mix in there, which I really think is like the key takeaway. And, what this hybrid thing is, it's mixing multiple technologies to make an app.
Yep, absolutely. And in a little bit we'll touch on that again. That's a great little tease there, because I think there are dipping your toes in the hybrid space isn't a full on jump off the cliff kind of into the water kind of situation. You can definitely dip your toes into it, and we'll kind of talk about that as well, what that involves. Yeah. But as far as, there are what's really exciting about it, and why I got into using PhoneGap and that technology several years ago, even before joining Ionic, was four major key features, right? First one being write once, run everywhere. So this is where that is one option if you do go with approach like our Ionic approach, which is using web technologies. We have the ability these days to use and develop one code base that can provide great experiences, great user experience and UX across mobile, desktop, Electron type apps, which are native desktop, iOS, Android, and then progressive web apps, which are also fully web based. The idea there is we do get, with some of the frameworks available, platform continuity. So a lot of some of them today, such as Ionic, can provide unique and native styling or native looking styling for that platform. So it's not, I think one concern you typically see is, well, if this app looks like a web page. And while it's certainly in the past easy to fall into that trap, or depending on what technology you choose, more and more frameworks and libraries and SDKs that have come up today provide that platform continuity, so that, again, your end user is interacting with that native app and is not able to tell essentially what the technology is behind it, nor should they care.
And I do want to point out one thing on that. It's not as much as just, the CSS is a little different here and there. It's animations, it's gestures, it's how components interact with one another, and these are like really big things that frameworks these days and tools, they they take care of that really well, especially in Ionic. Like, not to toot our own horn, but it's something that we have taken a lot of consideration in.
Absolutely, that's a great point. Mobile devices completely changed how we interacted with computers, and device and just that whole experience, because as you said, different hand gestures and animations and other types of interacting with the real world, taking pictures and Bluetooth and all those types of features that you typically don't, and it wouldn't make sense for the traditional desktop computer form factor, right? It opened up this whole world, and to try to fit that is a very valid, potential concern, is trying to fit web, old, in this case, different technology that shouldn't be embedded into something, without some rework. Well, that's definitely something to think about. Yeah. The next really great point that I think can be, it depends on the type of your team makeup, is the ability to use the talent you may already have. So oftentimes regardless of your company size and team size, the reality is you likely have several web developers on the team that are experts in what they do, on interacting with browser technology and building great UX experiences, on your main websites and everything. So the other thing that's really interesting is the from what we've seen from our research, the web developer community is 30 times greater than the native mobile app developer side of things, which is quite something. So the talent is already out there, whether it's internal to your business or you need to hire more, right? And what's kind of neat about this hybrid approach and using that is you can leverage this in-house talent that you already have. And that's incredibly powerful because then you're avoiding having to go through different and newer hiring cycles, depending on what region of the country or the world you live in. Different finding native app devs could be a challenge, and finding quality folks that can produce the kind of experiences that users expect these days, especially on mobile, can be really difficult.
And one other point is, as you're building out this, if you are a small startup or like maybe one or two like solo indie devs, as you're trying to like build out this, build something out, you really want to spend the amount of money it costs to hire like native devs, because they're fairly expensive. Their going rates are really high these days. And with web devs, like you get a better efficiency for like you better return on investment for however much you need to pay to hire these people. If you have someone who can write, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, why would you need to hire two people who have to write two separate code bases?
Yeah, and that's a great point. Whether you're a startup to a large enterprise, the reality is hiring, finding that talent, and more again on the startup side per se, affording it could be a challenge. But there's a lot of overlap, regardless of your company size, of those kind of challenges. Yeah, and there's nothing better than, talk about retention too. Being able to provide different types and mix up the type of work that your web folks can do. In this case, get into mobile or other platforms. That's. I know while I don't have any numbers behind that, I imagine over time we're going to see more and more of that as a real hiring benefit and something that companies really tout as for building up experience and different types of opportunities within the company. The next point I really like as well is we can achieve with the hybrid app approach better user experience across multiple platforms. The user experience can mean lots of things. A lot of folks think of performance, especially when it comes to the native versus hybrid comparison, and we'll kind of dig into that a little bit soon here. But user experience extends really even beyond that traditional performance. As hardware in especially mobile devices has gotten exponentially better in the last 5-10 years, we're able in the hybrid approach and with web tech now and the evolution of browsers, we're able to take advantage of hardware-based performance acceleration, just like native apps can. So a lot of those kind of concerns get really thrown out the window. Would you agree, Mike?
Yeah, I would agree. It's crazy. Yeah, I agree. Sorry.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I've seen we just had another round. It's early fall, and we had another round of iOS and Apple updates to their phone lines and iPhones and everything. And it's just the amount of RAM and CPU power and other things that just even are inherent in the devices that developers almost get for free. You know what I mean? As upgrade cycles come over time, our software gets faster naturally because of those types of hardware elements that just continue to improve with each iteration, each generation, right?
Yeah, you look at like devices. I think it was iPhone 5 was one of like the first iPhones that I thought was, ooh, this is something big. This is like fast. This is crazy. Like I would load up apps back then and just kind of go, how is this thing this fast and this powerful? It was really interesting to like look at that, and then all of a sudden, time has gone on, it's continued to improve. Like my iPhone, I have an iPhone 10, and sometimes it's faster than my laptop even. Like, it's just crazy how good performance is on devices these days.
Well, absolutely. And if, the same, if not better specs than your laptop, and look at everything we're using these devices for.
I mean, it's not just making phone calls these days. It's processing all these photos in real time and AR and all this crazy stuff.
I mean, I remember losing my iPod with my entire music collection on it, would carry it everywhere like everyone else did several years ago. And then I just had this epiphany moment as I got in maybe my second smartphone, Android smartphone or something, and of like, well, wait, I don't need to replace it. I could just use the phone. I can use this awesome device, add more storage to it if I need to with an SD card or upgrade it over time. And there you go. I've saved a lot of money even as a user, right? And just having all those different features in one spot has been, completely life-changing for many of us. It kind of lends back to what we were saying about user experience. That not only, much like mobile devices in general can provide these great experiences and different types all under one roof, it's the same thing with hybrid apps. It goes beyond performance concerns, and we can do and offer really great experiences anyway. I remember one of our customers, Dow Jones, their Market Watch app that provides near real time financial data. They were able to change and fix their bad ratings with their native app version, and change that from lower 1 to 2 star ratings up to 4.5 stars on Android and iOS. And that just goes to show like there's more, and it wasn't performance, your traditional performance based kind of issues. It was just keeping up to date with latest mobile features and just providing a great mobile context experience, at that time. So we've seen a lot of success stories as mobile devices have gotten faster and the hardware has become more capable of running both hybrid and native apps. So, and kind of thinking about that, we've talked about the past a lot, but the last great point that I think is incredibly important about the hybrid experience, and especially investing in web technologies, even if you're thinking outside of mobile devices. We've seen right now Android and iOS are the dominant players, but it wasn't that long ago. I wonder if you've done tried to support these yourself, Mike, even like with Ionic or independently, but it wasn't that long ago that we had Windows Phone, BlackBerry, and some other, I think Firefox OS almost was a thing, but never was. So, it's, as we look towards what the future is going to look like, as any sort of business or entrepreneur, even as a hobbyist, like you want to be thinking towards the future. And no matter where you're coming from, it's always a concern, which is what platforms, what capabilities, what frameworks am I looking at? What do I have available to me now? And what new ones are going to emerge in the future? It'd be really interesting in 5 years from now to do a retrospective and say, are we just using iOS and Android, or is there some other thing that hasn't even been invented yet that's completely, gotten rid of those? And right.
I mean, if we want to talk about some old platforms, Tizen, WebOS, those are some of the first like platforms I was like building things for. I had iOS, I had Android, BlackBerry, Windows Phone. Anyone? That was going to change the world. We kid. But no, I mean it does paint a point. If I had built all of those apps using those native technologies, and then come to find out all of those platforms, they eventually, either died or went away. Like, I would have wasted, it felt like, all that time and effort in investing into those platforms and investing into those technology stacks. When if I had just stuck with web stuff, like I would have been able to be much more effective, be able to work with all of these things and still reach the target devices that I needed, just with a lower barrier entry and less investment on these native platforms.
Right. Because, at the end of the day, we're all here to deliver value to our customers, to our users, our businesses, and whatever, whatever objectively gets us there is I think the majority of folks is what should be used. And, we look back at history, and the World Wide Web is the most widely used application runtime in the world and has been for several decades. And so when we think towards the future, we really don't see that going anywhere anytime soon. And in fact, it keeps more and more, huge companies are investing in it, and developers, again, there's just millions of web developers these days and growing. I think it's probably Mike and I, as teachers out there giving presentations, have, I think you'll agree with me, Mike, have probably seen that it's, for a lot of folks that are getting into programming as well, the next generations after us of the workforce and our economies are starting with web tech and browser technology, right?
Yeah, agreed. They're starting with JavaScript, and even if you want to, if you're a person in the academia, like JavaScript and web technologies are like core tenets of like college computer science courses. It's just crazy to see how much the ecosystem has changed. So we've talked about some of the good parts of hybrid technologies and building things using hybrid apps. Like everything, though, there are some drawbacks. There are some painful points that, if you want to be an informed person, you should probably be aware of these. And I know one painful point that I've always had to deal with, or I have constantly talked about, is system requirements. Like if you were to build Photoshop on an iPad and then attempt to do it with web technologies, you're probably going to be, in a world of hurt. Or even like 3D graphics. Like this is one thing that, I like to tell people is like 3D graphics, there are a reason why there are specialized APIs on in native. They're not there just because people want to use them. Like things like Metal and Android's equivalent of these high efficiency 3D rendering APIs. They are there for a reason, and they are there to make efficient 3D models, 3D games. It's just things that is kind of obvious at that point. Like you would probably want to do that either natively or using some kind of native approach. But I was curious, that's one of the big ones that I always look at. What's some of the drawbacks or like limitations that you try to inform of people?
Yeah. I think, system overhead's a big one. Really, the background behind why that is because of the web view kind of component and idea we talked about. Just by it really, at the end of the day, the best way to describe it is, in your programming technology stack, it's just another layer of complexity. So just by nature of that, you're going to have more complexity and overhead compared to native. And like you said, and we fully embrace that. There's a reason why graphics cards are so expensive, is because they're able to do some incredible 3D and other graphics type of things, right? And that's what they're built to do. And so, for really, if you're trying to build a world-class mobile game or desktop game, a hybrid might not be the best choice, right? And that's okay. That's okay. I think.
Right. I wouldn't expect anyone to build the video game God of War, or even like any of the other 3D games on my phone uh using just web technologies.
No, and that goes down to no tool, platform, programming language is perfect for every use case. Most in a typical, I think, company perspective, does it work? Yes, because with line of business apps, we're typically managing and updating and reading data, right? Changing data and all that, having that stream between different integrations, different systems. And in that case, yeah, it's absolutely viable. You can develop some wonderful experiences with that. But I think, to your other point, the other kind of drawback comes in with third-party plugins. So we did mention earlier that you can use device features like the camera, Bluetooth, geolocation, all those types of things that mobile devices over, like, say, desktop computers or laptops provide us. But the drawback there is they still need to be the code that interfaces with those devices, because it is physical hardware, requires native code to be written to interact with them. And that's the same as it's always been since the dawn of computers, and likely always will be. And what we end up using are plugins, which, much like Chrome browser extensions or adding apps onto your device and updating things, a plugin at the end of the day is something that is augmenting a feature of a system, right? And what we end up having is what is really nice, though, I will say, is from the web developer's perspective, these plugins that are created, there is a standard way to build them in a well-defined way. There's hundreds of them out there that are likely do what the majority of folks want to do in terms of features. Again, like you'd expect, device vibration, the camera, anything on a mobile device. But what you end up doing is having to write the native side of the code and exposing it through one web API interface. So what I really love about that is, from the developer's perspective of a hybrid app, they don't need to know how to code in that language, in those native languages. They just work with essentially JavaScript, what they're familiar with, to accomplish those features. Yeah. The last element of that could be seen as kind of a con of hybrid is the framework dependencies that come with it. And that kind of builds off of the third-party plugins idea with a different twist. By using this approach, and when it comes to accessing the latest and greatest native features and design patterns, there's going to be a little bit of a lag behind that, because we do need to, whether it's providers of UI frameworks like Ionic, or open source contributors that are building those third-party plugins, there just naturally is going to be a time where, once Apple or Google or whomever releases these great new hardware features, I'm thinking of, let's say, nowadays, augmented reality, or I don't know, Mike, what's another good one? Something that's just cutting edge. You're not going to be able to tap into that.
Now, augmented reality is a really good one. I mean, there are some efforts on the website of things, but the way that native right now it has it, and the APIs and just tools that they have available they are ready for prime time. It's stuff that, not necessarily is ready on the website of things, but give it a few years. But I think this does bring up a point. It's like, it's always evolving. It is a point, though. It's like, these are things that you can kind of integrate, but it's just you have to go through that effort to integrate it.
And I found, teams that have a native developer too on them can typically take over this work. And again, though, it's seen often as a sticking point or a huge con. But I don't think, unless it's much like the 3D graphics in video games. If you're building those, then the right tool for the job, just like anything. So in that case, native is the best way to go.
Like, you wouldn't expect someone to build a house with just a shoe, right? It's not the right tool for the job. You need something that's going to be able to build what you need and build it efficiently. And that's the key word, I think, that people don't focus on, is like, can I build this efficiently and build this in a way that I'm not going to be, pulling my hair out as I'm going along this app development process.
Yeah, and yeah, Mike, tell me like more about like if you want to like I really had thought of this. What about dipping your toes into it? Like, do you need to go full tilt and from scratch, or can you, if you have a native app, is there anything you can do even today to start trying it out with like sprinkle some JavaScript in there?
Yeah, I mean, so there's plenty of different ways that you can do this, whether or not it's you're pulling in, maybe a couple different web views inside of your app. I think a really good one was my previous job needed a section of the app to be constantly updated without having to go through App Store submissions. So we just created a web view and loaded up remote content that was using HTML, CSS. It was using original old Ionic code to render all this. So that's one approach where you can just throw in a web view. Basecamp's another really famous one where they create mixtures of native components in their apps and also web portions. So that way they're not having to build their entire app once they want to get the web version and then the native version. They can have that kind of code sharing that they that fits comfortable for them.
Absolutely. The thing I most noticed that I won't name names because this is somewhat of a guess. I mean, of course, not having access to their code and their technology, but I think the biggest trend I've seen really well-known companies do, like you said that this one you work for did as well, is using a web view to embed essentially their support or FAQ sections of their websites in, especially from a support standpoint. You'll typically have customers be able to reach out over email or phone, but I think the gold standard is, of course, having written out content that people can peruse through. And especially in technology, that changes. The answers can change all the time. And having to go through an app store update just because you need to add or maybe change a product name here or there would be incredibly painful, right? So I think being able to have even maybe your marketing team through their CMS system update some marketing copy and then have it automatically be refreshed in the user's app that's one incredible way to get started with that kind of approach. There's lots out there on the web, especially from Basecamp, about them doing that.
Yeah, they had an awesome blog post out some time ago, but it does hit the key points that you can have the best of both worlds and still ship something that while being native does utilize some hybrid technologies. Now, we've covered so much already. What would we kind of summarize for this? How would you summarize, like, why would you want to use a hybrid approach? Why would you want to use a native approach? Like, what are some of the key takeaways that you would want people to know?
There's a bunch of things, to kind of summarize the native aspects there. Depending on, again, the platform, but for mobile, performance for sure is naturally going to be the best, depending on what you're doing, again, with graphics or other types of newer and latest, greatest features. Because those rich native libraries and SDKs are available out of the box from Apple, Google, Windows Phone, whatever, right away. There aren't, as a result, there's not any third-party dependencies. You're getting one full solution from, again, your Apples, your Googles of the world, and things like that. So I think that one of the major items we like to highlight, Mike, is the distribution method. So that is something to kind of really think about when you're looking at a new project, or even augmenting a kind of a more legacy application that you might want to bring to other experiences, maybe beyond the desktop browser, for example. With the native approach, you're really limited to just the app stores, the App Store, iOS App Store, and Google Play. And that is because, again, you're using the native approaches languages that are custom built and tailored for those app stores and for mobile devices. Versus with the kind of going across platform with the hybrid solution, you do have more options. You can reach the app stores by bundling your web-based code into a native shell and publishing it as basically a native app. And then there's also the traditional means, which are the desktop and mobile browsers, reach users in more of a website or web app form. A really popular one these days is publishing it as a desktop app with the Electron framework. Some great examples of that, such as billion-dollar company Slack, Visual Studio Code from Microsoft. I think Microsoft Teams is also a hybrid app. So there's lots of small to massive companies using these type of web technologies to really reach tons of customers. And the last kind of main point there are progressive web apps.
Progressive web apps. I happen to know a thing or two about them.
I know. That's why, you know it best.
I mean, there's a bunch of marketing words that I could say to better illustrate what they are, but they're really just web apps that you can load on, whether or not it's a desktop, whether or not it's your mobile device, that takes advantage of newer features and allows you to create a much more integrated approach. Again, the key point here is that it's all web technology based. So if you are building out an app that uses a cross-platform approach using something that is like Ionic or some other framework that is 100% HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, using something like using something like that can give you a PWA instantly for free without having to go through any redesigns, redevelopment. You just get that because of how it's built. And then you can deploy it to whatever hosting provider you use, Netlify, Firebase hosting, now from the Zeit people. These are approaches that you can use without having to go through a whole lot of work, and it really brings forward this idea of developing once and deploying it everywhere. It's like not only do you get native iOS and native Android for those who want that, you get a desktop app for people who want that using something like Electron. You get a really integrated mobile experience with PWAs. You could even go as far with new releases of Chrome and have a save to desktop version using some new Chrome APIs that are coming out. Or if you want to go completely in a different direction, there's things like Chrome OS where it really does, all the apps in there are 100% web technologies. So there's great reasons why you would want to do hybrid technologies.
Well, and you really touched on it there. The result is a natural lower development cost, because traditionally building native apps, one unique tool set, frameworks, and the whole stack, it's more time consuming, right? There's speed to develop there. It's just going to be a little bit slower. I mean, not just, it really depends on what your goal is there, but it can be, could be months, years of development time, right? And it's depending on your team size and other things, as well as maintenance cost. Because each of these platforms, they do one thing really well, but the drawback there and what that kind of implies is you need people and talent that can keep up to date with the latest and greatest. Maintenance is such, I don't know what the stat is, but I would say far and above the largest effort and concern of software development, right? It's not writing shiny new features and things like that. It's putting in the effort to keep your business going, your website going, or your apps going that supports your business. And that's where, again, you do end up with potentially better graphical performance, depending on what your goals are there. Perhaps less so in the hybrid approach, because you're not using those that native tech. But at the end of the day, the user experience and performance has really equalized in the last few years. I think we've got all types of examples I'd love to touch on at the end here, but I think at the end of the day, if you're able to keep your costs down and develop and iterate in an agile fashion, just delivering value to your internal business units, your customers, and everyone in between, that's a win. If you can do it with the hybrid approach, then you might as well.
And that brings to a really, really good and short answer when your boss says, should I do hybrid or should I do native? The famous answer that I like to give, well, it depends. So we're going to summarize this entire episode by just saying hybrid is great if it fits your use case, and native is great if it fits your use case. You can be very productive, and there are people who are very productive with hybrid. You can also be productive with native development. It all depends, and everyone can have a happy, good time. So we're going to close this episode out. I think we've reached a pretty good length, and hopefully this discussion, has been good for everyone else, and maybe it inspires some discussion internally with your company. Matt, thank you for joining me today, and we'll see everyone next time.